Sometimes the journey is more memorable than the destination. I have a recurring dream in which I remember a train trip from when I was at school. The class had an outing to some other town, I can't really remember where or why. I was 15 and awkward as hell. School trips, GCSEs, exam grades, none of these were as important as girls to me. It didn't really help that none would look at me twice for any number of reasons. Not sporty, not clever, not tough, not fun. The first part of the train trip had been something of a relief in that regard. The carriage had a single seat at the back, and while everyone else paired up or took over tables with groups, I was left relatively alone. If I'd been nearer the middle of the train, I'd have been picked on for any number of reasons. Instead, I was allowed to stare out of the window and have some peace. It was raining outside, and watching the raindrops streak across the glass was good enough to hold my attention. Once we'd left the city and were speeding through empty countryside, there was a loud bump from the ceiling above me. A few other classmates noticed, but no one seemed to be very concerned. Tom, one of the jokers of the class, laughed it off as a bird hitting the train. It sounded a lot louder than a bird. A moment later, Al walked across the train and looked up at the ceiling, standing directly in front of me. Al wasn't really a slow kid, he just didn't get jokes, which usually made him the butt of them. This made him not want to talk to people, because he was expecting to be laughed at, and big as the lunk was, he couldn't intimidate anyone into stopping. He stood in front of me, frowning up at the ceiling. It was at least a minute before I asked, "What are you looking at, Al?" Al looked down at me. I think he was trying to figure something out, by the expression on his face. Maybe he thought the bump was part of a prank at his expense. "Not sure," he said, before returning to his seat. A few minutes later, there was another bump, this one further up the carriage, near to where Lorraine and Jessie were. Lorraine and Jessie were the pretty girls, and everything the 15-year-old me ever wanted. This was down to me being an idiot at 15, not because of any great attribute of either Lorraine or Jessie. It didn't help that both bullied me, because they knew they could get away with it. Rather than put me off them, it only made me want them more, because of some twisted, masochistic yearning the 15-year-old me was plagued with. I was an idiot at 15. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, because who lets girls bully them, and who'd lust after their bullies? The bump on the carriage roof was louder than before. It made me laugh to see Lorraine yelp and jump at the noise. I liked seeing those two taken down a peg, if only because they seemed more attainable. Again, Al got up from his seat to investigate the noise, staring up at the ceiling with a frown. Jessie made some joke about him coming to rescue her. He didn't react. Then Lorraine started her matchmaker prank. I'd fallen for it, not 2 weeks previously, and had been left waiting outside the school bus stop like a pillock for an hour. As she spoke, Al frowned at her, then wordlessly went back to his seat. I felt a bit sorry for him, as others joined in the joke at his expense. If anything, he seemed more worried about the bumps than what anyone said. He glanced back at me, then at the ceiling above Lorraine and Jessie, then around the carriage, nodding at the others as if counting them. He was twitching his fingers as well, which only brought more derision from the girls. To them, it looked like rude gestures, because that's all anything looks like when you're 15. It wasn't till years later I realized what he was doing. A computer engineer asked me, "What's the highest number you can count to on your digits?" Thinking I knew the trick, I answered 8, because thumbs aren't fingers. The engineer shook his head, explained that thumbs were digits, and the answer wasn't 10, but 1023. He then proceeded to explain binary numbers to me. If we assume finger down is 0 and finger up is 1, there are 1024 configurations possible. As all fingers down would be 0, that leaves 1023 other numbers possible to track on your fingers. It was a while till I connected the two things, but Al wasn't twitching his fingers randomly. He was counting, in binary. Other weird details started to stick out at this point. 2 rows up from where I was sat, Rob Langtry's phone rang. It was his parents asking where he'd put the back door key, which turned out to be in his pocket. When Lorraine and Jessie realized Al wasn't listening to them, they turned back to their music. We went through a tunnel, with the girls shrieking in false terror as the carriage plunged into darkness. After we left the tunnel, not 30 seconds after, there was another, louder bang, this one hitting the right-hand side of the train. This made everyone jump, as whatever it was flashed past the window. Some people said it was definitely a bird, others that someone must have jumped in front of the train. This started an argument that made the teachers in the next carriage interrupt. There was no place to jump from, said the teacher. I can't remember which teacher it was, either Mr. Morehouse or Mr. Baker. Whoever it was, he told us off, saying we shouldn't even joke about such things. Once he'd left, Tom started to tell a long and bad taste joke about people throwing themselves in front of trains. He never got to the end of it, as the girls started throwing things to make him shut up. The memory comes up every now and then, maybe once every 3 months or so. I'll fall asleep and find myself back on the train. Sometimes I'll forget that I'm dreaming, and think I've genuinely gone back to my adolescence. The emotion that comes from that is invariably, I have to be 15 again, being 15 was rubbish. And then I struggle to remember what world events I should try and warn people about. The dream always ends on Tom's joke. He never gets to finish it. One morning, it bugged the hell out of me, so I found the end of the joke online. The 15-year-old me would have laughed, but then the 15-year-old me was an idiot. So when I found myself back on the train, sat by myself, it wasn't a big surprise. Sometimes I'm aware I'm in a dream and recognize it. True to form, the ceiling bumped. Al walked up. Lorraine and Jessie taunted him. I knew it was a dream, so I just let it drift past me. Tom told his joke. The ceiling bumped. Al walked up, walked back. Ceiling bumped again. Lorraine and Jessie teased him. Side of the train banged. Tom told his joke. Ceiling bumped. Al walked up. Ceiling bumped again. Tunnel bang joke bump. Hold on. Sure enough, Al walked up again, frowning at the ceiling as he'd done 3 times before. He then walked back, the ceiling bumped again, and Lorraine and Jessie taunted him, only this time their words were as fresh in my memory as the day they were said. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Al," said Jessie. "I could make it up to you. Want to go to the club with me tomorrow? I know a place that'll let us in." Strange, I thought. I always thought it was Lorraine who started that matchmaker prank on Al, because she'd done it to me. But sure enough, Jessie continued to talk, with Lorraine only watching with amusement. Again, Al ignored them, and his fingers twitched as he nodded at the others in the carriage. I never noticed before, but just as he nodded at Rob Langtree, that was when his phone went off. I turned to the right-hand window. I knew what had happened, even if no one else did. Sure enough, the side of the train banged and the shape flew past. Still too quick to see any detail, especially through the rain-streaked glass. But this time, I saw it wasn't a bird. It was far too big, and it had black and white patches to it, like a business suit, I thought. Another detail which went by in a second. The streaks on the window looked darker, in places, like spatters of deep red. The rain washed away this evidence so quickly, I couldn't be sure if I'd honestly seen it. I didn't even notice the teacher come in. Tom was starting his joke, but he was cut off as the ceiling bumped above me. Al walked up, frowning at the ceiling. This time, I noticed his hands. He was giving me the finger with the right. If I'd been 15, I probably would have taken offense and flipped him right back. 15-year-old me really was a pillock. "What's going on, Al?" Al frowned at me again. "What are you looking at?" At first, I thought he was being confrontational. This, combined with the middle finger he was still giving me, would have certainly started a 15-year-old fight that I would have lost, and badly. But the finger was held as casually to his side as a resting hand, and he'd said those words in the same tone as I'd said them to him. He continued to stare at me for longer than he had before. It could have been a minute, maybe more, till I realized what was expected of me. "What are you looking at, Al?" He breathed a sigh of relief, then frowned at me. "Not sure," he said, then returned to his seat. The second bump happened, and he started counting on his fingers. I noted that each time he nodded at me, his left hand would clench into a fist, while the right would raise the middle finger. He nodded at Rob Langtry. His phone rang. Nodded at Sophie Turner as she hiccuped, turning red even though nobody heard it. I hadn't noticed that before, but something in my mind told me it had happened. I wasn't making up new details. The tunnel, the bang, the teacher that I now remembered as Mr. Morehouse, the unfinished joke, every detail was as important and precise as the next. The ceiling bumped above me. Al walked up, frowning at the ceiling. This time his middle finger and thumb were held up on his right hand. Outside I could see the countryside wasn't moving. The hedgerows that had previously been a blur were now in perfect focus, and the sound of the train was notably missing. I stood up and walked down the carriage aisle. The whole scene was frozen, and so every detail was there to be studied. It was all waiting on me, asking the question. There was a sense of tension, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for an actor to say the first line that started the play. I'd hold the moment for as long as I could. Every minor detail was there for my perusal, no matter how insignificant. John Toohey was scratching his nose. Adam Connor was staring at Debbie Miller. She must have sat down at an odd angle, causing her skirt to rise up just high enough for a 15-year-old to notice. Debbie was popping a blue mint into her mouth. It floated on the threshold, and she was oblivious to Adam's stare. Jessie was covering the cuff of her shirt sleeve. The stitching had come loose, and she was trying to hide it. I went up and down the carriage, studying everything that might be important, and a lot of things that never would be. I then wondered, what if I left the carriage? What if I could study the whole world in this captured moment and make this my mastermind specialist subject? The moment which, depending on whose watch or phone you went by, was between 10:02:31 and 10:07:56. I turned back to my seat. Al was still stood there, and even though I'd moved, he was still watching me. If this was my specialist subject, Al would be the researcher who'd verify the questions, and he'd get no passes, no wrong answers, no hesitations. Whatever was happening, whatever had happened, I corrected myself. Not only had he noticed it first time, but he'd answered not sure, instead of I have no idea. What are you looking at, Al? In saying the words, I renounced all claims to omniscience. The scene carried on, and I was now powerless to stop it. Details rushed by, too quick to be studied. Debbie ate her mint, then straightened out her skirt. Adam Connor, with the teasing display of upper thigh now over, turned to face John Toohey, who'd finished scratching his nose. Everything I'd thought I'd known, in that moment, was thrown away, like yesterday's newspaper. As Al walked back, I realized I was blocking his way, with all the petulance of a king stopping the tide. I stood in the aisle, staring back at his impassive gaze. This was my dream, and I'd be damned if I made way for anyone. Al lifted his hands as he walked up, waving to one side. You weren't stood there. I gripped the seats beside me. I'm not moving. Not till I know what's going on. What went on? Al said. This is the past. Remember? You can't change it. The scene had frozen again. Jessie was caught in a moment of anxiety, hoping no one noticed her uniform was tatty. Even though she was a bully, she wasn't immune to it, if a weakness was spotted. I tried to remember what happened to her after school. Didn't she get pregnant before her exams? Or was that just a rumour? It's hard to tell what's rumour and truth about some things. I'm changing it, right now, I said, pointing at the ceiling and shouting. Any moment now, the ceiling will bang. Sure enough, no sooner had the words been said, the carriage roof banged directly above me. Everyone in the carriage flinched except for me. I pointed at Jessie, who hadn't recovered from the noise. Your cuff is ripped. You're hoping no one notices. I turned to Rob Langtry. Your phone's about to ring. Check your pocket. My prophecy came true, and Tom pulled the back door key from his pocket just as his parents were asking about it. Al tried to grab me by the shoulders. Stop it, right now. I pushed out of his grip, reaching for the communication line. The train hit the tunnel, but no one screamed. The darkness opened again. I was back in my seat. Above me was a bump. Al walked over. This time his hands had changed. 2 fingers extended in a V, rather than the middle finger, counting in binary, I thought. Before it must have been 4 and 5. Now it was 6. What's happening, Al? Do you know? Al sighed and relaxed his shoulders. They've noticed you now. They're searching for something, rereading the same line till it makes sense. Who are they? Al frowned. I'm not sure. Other people don't see them or what they do. I think we confuse them. They can't tell what we are. From what I've seen, they can't tell the difference between the real and imagined. The past and memories are the same to them, and they travel into both. We don't stick out as important, normally. Other people are too busy living their lives to notice them, and whatever these things are after is more important than us. Maybe if you let this memory go, they would have passed it over and searched somewhere else. But it's my memory. Al smiled coldly at me. Is it? You've seen things you never noticed before. You've heard and seen things you didn't remember. You're asking me for answers. Are we still in the dream? Or are we in the past? Or are you the memory of another person who did notice all these things? I didn't know what to say. Al shrugged and walked back to his seat. I'm not even sure myself. These things are like blind excavators, digging through memory and time. Dirt and soil feel the same, and it all gets mixed up. I'd avoid trying to make your memories feel different to them. Different is important. The recollections sped up as Al sat back down. Bump, tunnel, bang, joke, back to the beginning. Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang. I lost track of how many times the cycle continued. Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang. I was now powerless to stop the scene. Al stood in front of me, his fingers in a new configuration. Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang. I rubbed my head. The drumming was giving me a headache. How many times? Al held up both hands. 205 since we last spoke. They've decided you speaking wasn't important, so they're skipping it entirely now. I looked around the carriage. Parts of the memory were being wiped away like loose soil from a piece of treasure. Adam and Debbie were now faceless, though the mint was still in front of her face. The tunnel was over like a sudden blip in the lights, although the noise and screams echoed over the memory for a long time afterwards. Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang. The screams were fast becoming a feedback loop, drowning out all other noises, all except those 3 collisions. Bump, bump, bang. Tom's joke was scrubbed away from the dream, as well as the teacher's. Everything was focusing on that sound. Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang. I stood up, walking to where Al was sat. How can I stop this? You can't, Al said patiently. This is the past. We can't change it. No, I mean, the excavators, whatever they are, how do we stop them? How do I get out of my dream? Al frowned at me. You still think this is your dream? I struggled to shout above the drumming that filled the carriage. How do I stop them? Al held up his hands. You tell me, he said. Can you remember the number? Did you see how many times this would be relived? Perhaps that's the thing they're after. So why aren't they in your memory? Al smiled humorlessly. If you noticed these things, how they searched and how bad they were at it, would you, want to be a target? How is it, having your past sifted and muddled? Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang. I staggered back to my seat, hoping that the dream would pass. I was going to wake up. This was just a memory. Bump, bump, bang, bump, bump, bang, bump. The noise stopped. The carriage had returned to normal. Al walked over and frowned at the ceiling. The memory was playing out exactly as I remembered, exactly how it had 1,000 times before. Whatever the search was for, I couldn't remember it. I looked at Al's hands. If I could count binary, I would have known what number he was indicating. Then a thought occurred. Were the searchers, the blind excavators as Al called them, searching for what hit the train? Or was the train hit by the excavators as they searched? Al had noticed them, after all. Perhaps that noise was the sound he'd been drawn to, the sound of a spade driving through time without regard for its course. It didn't matter. The search was over. I could return to the present, and a horrible realization hit me. I couldn't remember the present. My life, past this moment, was a blank space, and even though I knew this was a dream, I couldn't remember anything beyond it. Had I really travelled back to the past, or was my life a dream I was only just waking from? I grabbed onto whatever rationale I could. I still knew the train was going to be hit. I could see everything in the near future with perfect clarity, the bump, the bang, the joke. Whatever it was that hit the train, I was going to find out. Even if this was a dream, I didn't care. If the excavators dug through my past, I'd be damned if I let them take my present with it. As Al walked away, I stood up, looking for an exit. The exterior door next to me was locked. I opened the fire alarm panel, grabbing the hammer and breaking the window. As I climbed out onto the roof, a thought flashed by. I shouldn't be able to do this. No one can climb out of a window onto the roof of a moving train, let alone stand up, and especially not during a rainstorm. The thought disappeared as soon as it came. I inched my way up the train, working out where the next bump would come from. As I walked closer, I saw something. I understood it to be an eye, even though it wasn't eye-shaped. It was more like a floating, symmetrical spider, a twisted symbol rather than a real thing. It appeared too flat, like a cardboard cutout, but one that could move in a bizarre, jerking fashion. As I got closer, the thing showed no sign it had even noticed me. Once I was close enough, I leapt at it, banging my knees against the train as I caught the excavator. It thrashed and squealed, but I didn't let go. The thing cut at my hands like a thin sheet of glass, but I kept a firm grip, even as it raised away from the train and flew into the sky. It tried to shake me off. I was like a worm wrapped around a spade handle, and I refused to be dismissed as such. A voice spoke into my mind, strained as though it took great effort.
What is this?
I felt it referred to me, but I resisted telling it my name. You're in my memory. I sensed confusion before the voice replied.
But it isn't here.
Why is this train journey so important? I shouted. Why did you come here?
Journey,
said the voice, struggling with the concept. Far below me I could see the train on the track. It was moving back and forth, like a toy in a child's hands. I sensed an understanding.
it was before.
Said the voice, and the symbol disappeared. I floated for a moment, then fell. As I fell, I saw the train exit the tunnel and could see where I'd hit it, on the right-hand side, and I'd flash past the windows as I did. As I got closer, I heard the train wheels on the track. Bump, bump, bang. Bump, bump, bang. Bump, bump,